Hello everyone, and welcome to your Masters in Healthcare Management and Leadership. Today we're going to be speaking about Module 5. Module 5 is about operations management in the healthcare sector. Our topics include the definition of operations management, the different types, as well as the practical application to the healthcare sector. Today we're here with Dr. Dalli Gonzi, who will be sharing her expertise on the topic, and she'll also be your lecturer for Module 5. First of all, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Sandy.
Shall we get right to it?
Yes.
Okay. So my first question is more introductory. How would one define operations management?
So, thank you for this question. I think it's interesting. We could say that it's really about designing and controlling the process of production and also redesigning business operations when it comes to service provision. There are a number of definitions that students can look up. There is so much information today, which is quite interesting too, because it challenges our mind. But also, I think it's mainly concerned with planning, organizing, controlling, production and manufacturing, and obviously this also applies to the service sector, service operations. Apart from that, it is also delivery focused, and it ensures that the organization will deliver its outcomes successfully. So that's really important too. Another point I must add is that historically, operations management was called production management, and it evolved through time. But it shows that clearly roots are in manufacturing originally. So it's interesting to understand the processes that are present in manufacturing, and they're redefined, redeveloped, and improved through business improvement. So if we look at some key points or elements that probably we will mention throughout all the questions, so it's common to all, I guess we would look at quality, delivery, cost, flexibility, and most of all, connecting concepts in service operations.
Okay, I'd like to ask you about the definition of a process in the context of operations management.
Yes, so a process would be a number of steps belonging to a number of stakeholders, but in reality they would take you from an input all the way to an output. Now, processes come with various obligations or various responsibilities, tasks. So, I mean, we could look at what is called a work breakdown structure. It would be this massive table layout of tasks that are aligned according to primary tasks. So we could have a set of primary tasks, which take us to subtasks. So smaller tasks belonging to the primary. Now, when we look at improving such processes, we would use steps, right? So we would first understand a particular process, one process or more that an organization has, which would then be mapped out through a mapping process, keeping in mind who is the process owner, because that is part of the whole setting. Once that is true, we'd display this through a chart, so it's a very visual thing. Process mapping will result in a very visual layout of where these processes are and who are the stakeholders that they belong to. Once that is mapped out, each process is analyzed together with the owners, so the process owners. It's important that the analysts meet up with the process owners to understand where things can be shortened, steps can be removed, perhaps there are delays that were invisible before, but through the visual project they now are. And this helps the analyst understand better in which time frame he can operate to improve, and help the stakeholder understand which parts need to be retaught. So that would help processes. Now, once that is complete, we have to understand the flow of the improvements. So there's quite a tricky bit where implementation happens. So once we've done the paper-based exercise, the implementation is another new story. So it's like understanding where can I improve without affecting too many people. Am I affecting my customers when I make the change? How can I limit that impact? So there are a number of questions that need to be addressed in foresight to the intervention so that the process can be improved within an operations management setting with the least disruption. I think that's important and very critical to this sector, again, because it's health, quality is high.
Yes.
And maintaining quality throughout the change process is even more of a delicate issue. So I can really understand people who work in this field because it's important that there's a certain sensitivity to the nature of work, and that I can completely understand. So I don't know if this answers your question.
It does, and at the end of it, it's looking to improve in terms of effectiveness as well as efficiency.
Yes.
So trying to get that quality time balance.
Yes, exactly.
So,
exactly. And what we like to use as well, perhaps as a term in project management, is quality time, scope and budget. Some students might look up the I in triangle if they'd like some more information about it. But working within the quality time cost and keeping scope as aligned as possible to the original goal means that I can achieve what you've just said, efficiency and quality, whilst keeping in mind such criteria that require a balance.
Okay.
So yes, that's also a very valid point. Yes.
My next question is, which are the different types of operation systems design?
My area probably would address 6 or 7. And the first step would be looking at production systems. So let's take everybody through the different types, right? We'll start from there. This is most practically referred to assembly.
Okay.
So anything that relates to assembly. So if we're looking at, we can use an example in healthcare like an IV bag. Very simply, manufacturing and production would be having parts or components of that IV bag produced, coming together to form a final component. The environment is strictly controlled, so there's always quality. It's also sterile, so obviously there are a number of conditions that need to be there to make it as successful a product as possible. So that would be one aspect. Another aspect looking at it would be metrics. So metrics, what metrics would we look at? It's generally efficiency and also effectiveness. I mentioned some of the metrics before. I mentioned cost, quality. So these would also factor in. So price, time, flexibility, stock availability, environmental impact, perhaps we could also address that. So metrics are an area of measuring, so there's a measurement element to this. And it's also used for evaluation, so we can look at it from that point of view. A third step would be configuration management. So in this case, we would look at capacity, so capacity location, capacity sourcing, capacity in measurement, processes to facilitate capacity, technology that's related to capacity. So anything that will bring us towards managing effectively. We could also refer to resources, human resources, staff levels. So anything that relates to configuration management. Another one would also be service operations. Service operations is probably the one most closely linked to the healthcare industry that we're looking at. So what's important here is that delivery of service, obviously being so closely connected to the customer, because in nursing you're constantly facing your patients, it's a constant contact. So what's important there is that the outcome is as effective and efficient and of a high quality level as much as possible. The last two would then be mathematical modeling. So here we'd look at areas in statistics.
Okay.
In modeling itself, we could look at mathematics, so the use of these three elements to create, again, some form of, I would say, process optimization. That would be the key. The final one is safety, quality, and maintenance. So in this case, the emphasis I would put is on lowering risk. So ensuring that operations work within a safe environment, it's as low risk as possible, with the best maintenance systems in place to ensure that anything that's running in a process is as smooth as possible with the least impact.
So my next question is, what would bridge the gap between the study and the theory of operation system design and the practical application within the healthcare sector?
This is also important, and I think I'd look at 4 areas. First of all, we would look at organizational restructuring as an area for process improvement. Okay. In this case, this is a step which requires a lot of input from the organization itself, from the people who are involved, so staff, workers at all levels in the organization. Data is collected from people working closely to the service. A survey, we could also top this up through survey. So you'd have a questionnaire, you could do it informally through interviews, qualitative, quantitative. Gather the data and start an analysis. Following that analysis process, that takes you to understand clearly scenarios that are evolving within the organization that perhaps are not visible to management. Through that analysis, the data is rethought, restructured, re-engineered, we can use that word as well. The processes are improved and staff are informed about this change and asked where they wish to take it. We could look at different ways of intervention. So you could have external consultants who are appointed to carry out the analysis and take on a bird's eye view without being perhaps emotionally involved. You could also have people within the sector. So perhaps there are people who are closely related to management within the nursing sector or healthcare sector, and they're interested in improving their processes internally. So they would do the same exercise themselves and produce a report, which can be done in both ways. It can also be done through collaborative approach. So you would get a mixed group of analysts between the external consultants and internal staff. And together they would produce the whole exercise. A second one would be, we can use this word, consensus conferences and evidence-based research. Okay. So in this case, what's important is that there is an outcome, there is a set achievement, a goal, a target that the sector wants to achieve. But in doing so requires evidence-based research to back up what is being said. Apart from that, you also need to build consensus towards an agreed goal. Without it, you'll end up having people just randomly giving their opinions or ideas without some form of unity. So that would also be a way of bridging the gap between, we're talking about models and theories and operations management all the way down to practical, to this practical application. This would help in a special way because you'd have an alignment with guidelines. So if the sector has guidelines that need to be adhered to, you can bridge the gap between consensus building and relating to these guidelines and try to find sort of a middle ground. A third step is more funding based, so this would be top-down incentive models. These are very much generally state pushed, so they require funding from the state. In this case, there's more probably strategy involved in this. So you've got more. The investment is required because the strategy that we can use in making change would result in probably more agreement at senior management, which is important because taking it down from senior all the way to operations requires championship. It requires a champion, a project champion. So this would be a third step. A fourth step would be models that incorporate trust building. So this is very relevant to the sector we're talking about because much of the service depends on trust. I mean, again, you've got doctors, nurses, there's trust in that level, you've got nurse-patient trust there. So in this case, we can add value to operations management by understanding the importance that the roles undertake within a trust-based context and use that trust to adopt better processes. So we'll keep trust as the core, the foundation of the idea, and use that to enhance the systems we have in place. So I feel that we can sort of ground the ideas into more practical solutions.
My next question is, how would one go about designing an operations system?
This is also a very, very interesting point. So if we take the current sector we're talking about and we place at the center of this operating system we could have in mind. So we would put patient safety, we would put customer care, we would put quality, we would put improved health systems, we would put maybe economic sustainability, and we would put business processes. So we put these at the core of the model. And then we could build a loop around that. So we could start from the top, which would be strategy and deployment of that strategy. So we need to sit and understand which processes require perhaps a review, which processes would require intervention. Is the staff workforce delivering the original intent? Do we need more staff? Or is it just a case that staff are so burnt out that they cannot deliver the expected targets and goals that the institution or the institute has placed on that staff? And we could use the term strategy deployment. So once we know what we wish to achieve, we can start to take it through to the next level. Deployment perhaps is a very large word. We could use also implementation. So I need to take what I say into something doable. Otherwise, it will end up just a paper-based exercise, and that's not what we want. The second step would be identifying metrics and the measurements. So what metrics do we currently have? So what data do we have to ensure that what we're going to say or project or propose is valid? So it's validated. And where do we wish to take the organization? So where do we wish to take staff? Do we wish to just increase numbers, or do we want to make sure that their output is quality? So we try to understand exactly what metrics we'd like to push forward. So using the data that we gather, we can then take that data towards perhaps forums. So we could bring larger groups of stakeholders within the institute itself, so people from all levels in the organization, to bounce off the original strategy and intended metrics and understand if these are possible or not. Because sometimes when you're a visionary and you're at senior level, some elements are doable, but some might be too far-fetched for operations to achieve.
Like a dream, kind of.
That's it. So we try to take idealism all the way to actualization. So that would be interesting because the data we receive back from the forums could be used to improve those metrics, the goals, and even the strategy itself. So once we've done that, we then move towards having roles and accountability in place. So who's going to take what? Who's going to be responsible for which area in producing the plan? So we've got roles defined, and we've also got accountability system in place. And let me give you a practical example. If us together decide to take something forward, we can choose to split the work. Your ownership is for part A, my ownership is for part B. We've created a boundary, so we know that we don't need to work or step on each other's areas because it would be really time wasted. And we also know that we're going to deliver part A and part B at the end of this project. So to make it really simple, it's basically that. I find that our culture sometimes perhaps should allow this to happen a bit more than it actually does, because it would assist people in terms of clarity of their roles. So going back to the original question that you asked, we'll add perhaps another 2 steps in this, which would be a scoreboard and finally improvement processing. So the scoreboard would be useful to understand that once implementation happens, so I've got roles assigned, right, and they're going to carry out the tasks. But I need to understand if those tasks are working or not. I mean, it's useless trying, and if the system is failing, we keep using the same system. It's time to improve. So we'll use the scoreboard, and finally we'll use a step of process improvement to close off that loop. So at process improvement level, I would expect that we could sit again. Let's take the same example together. So you would sit here, I would sit here, we would discuss and say, listen, all right, we've gone through the entire cycle. Have we really improved? Are we still where we are, or have we stepped back? Hopefully not. But that creates better discourse between us and more flexibility in being open to change. Because at the end of the day, I think that would also be one of the secrets to success in getting processes improved within the bigger hat of operations management.
And my last question for today, Dr. Dunley, is what would measuring the performance of such a system require?
So measurement, again, a very interesting area. We could look at measurement of, let's say, leadership. We could look at measurement of behaviors. We could also look at measurement of discipline. So three very important areas I find in the quality of healthcare. So if we looked at leadership, we could identify criteria for assessment of leadership. So say strong decision making, ready to take risks, so a risk taker, communication. So if we take these top 3, which are super important in any leader, if you're leading a program in healthcare, there is a sense of risk taking. There's not a sense, but an element of risk taking that you need to be, because you need to be strong and confident in being able to make change, take decisions, and inform your team that you're there to bounce off ideas, whichever path this change will take you. Behavior. I think behavior is also important in terms of how I interact with my patient. So if I'm wearing the nursing hat at this point, what is my communication strategy with my patient? I would question I would be very interested in understanding how my team deliver the operations that are requested out of them one-to-one with the citizen, with the customer. So if I'm having a bad day, do I just dump all my anger onto the patient? If I'm having a good day, how am I acting? Do I stick to protocol? Do I wear the uniform in the right way? Am I polite? Do I ask questions? I mean, so there are so many areas we can look into in building this up. Another aspect would be, we mentioned discipline, right? So discipline is important in every aspect, but the first step towards discipline is self-discipline.
Yes.
So if I, as a leader, am not self-disciplined towards myself and my remit, how am I going to expect my team to do the same? So I find this is very interesting with students. For example, students monitor their teachers and their lecturers very, very closely. They watch really close, they scrutinize whatever they're wearing. You know? And it's true, because they want to see that what we say, we actualize. Otherwise, it would become like just another lecture. That is not what they want. And I think the same model can apply in the system. So if you've got a team leader who is heading a team in a certain area, and the team leader stands up for what he or she is actually saying, it's much easier then to actualize measurement of behavior, because you're the first one taking step. Otherwise, it would be very hard to try and preach something which you're not actually doing yourself. Maybe I'd like to add something else to this, would be alignment of goals and objectives. I mentioned before that in senior management, the vision, the ideals can tend to be far apart from what's happening at ground level. So having alignment between target setting and what happens at frontline is critical to make processes work more efficiently. Again, would fall within the brackets of operations management. And this would allow, I think, would automatically allow better communication between operations level and senior management, because there'll be that dialogue between the two.
Okay. Well, Dr.
Very good. Very good.
Dudley, thank you for your time today. That sums up the questions I have for you. And would you like to add anything else or ask any other questions at this stage?
I think the topic is very interesting. I think the students should enjoy the journey. And I think they should try to make every journey very personal, because we say so many things, and you can read so many books and notes and pamphlets. But in reality, it's how you relate to this learning process. So what I'd like to invite students to do is to take a few or 3-4 points of the things we say together and try and apply them in a work context. So test what we say, test what we discuss in class, try it out in small steps. Because today you've made a small change, tomorrow we've made a slightly bigger change, and then it just follows on. And I think that will really help them put both areas together, giving them the best outcome really for this course.
Great. Thank you for your feedback and your advice to our fellow students. So there you have it, students. That was Module 5, Operations Management in Healthcare Sector. We defined operations management, we looked into the different types, and we looked into the practical application to the healthcare sector. Thank you, and see you next time.